What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the 1994 EP by Alice in Chains, and this project is called Jar of Flies. And basically this is the soonest follow-up to Alice in Chains' breakout 1992 album Dirt. And this is also one of the last vestiges of like a heavily kind of affiliated project with Lane Staley, the original vocalist on here. And Jerry Cantrell is also kind of on this project, and he would start to be introduced more and more later on with like their 1995 album Alice in Chains, and then further ones. But this is like one of the last true ones that has like Lane Staley as almost primarily like the main vocalist. I just would have to say that that's kind of the concept. It's an acoustic EP if you didn't know that. So if you're coming here thinking that there's more stuff like Dirt, that's actually, I remember buying this album back in the day and I thought that this was going to be like another mini package of Dirt, but it kind of was. I didn't realize it was acoustic. So it has a pretty nice packaging. It's an overall very dark, malaise, and kind of it's an overall dark malaise and overall melancholy album. Dirt was pretty dark also, but this one just has like really, the thing about acoustic is it's kind of almost popish and kind of more folk friendly and just more contemporary for the most part. I mean, I feel like Dirt was just kind of more metal despite the fact that it was a grunge album, but I kind of look after it just to be able to say that this is a lot of, interestingly enough, commercial Alice in Chains without all the kind of overt kind of grunge and metal kind of sounding stuff, but it does retain like the malaise kind of darkness about this. And really, Lane Staley and Jerry Cantrell have some truly haunting kind of lyrics that just give this overall package like a real kind of spook of a time in a lot of ways. I just think that that's kind of the concept about it. So this album really has like a truly kind of leery kind of feel about it, but I just look over it overall, that kind of contributes to the package. Now, I'm not wholesomely sold by this project. I do feel like it has some good songs, but I don't feel like it's a full-blown classic. But it did definitely go multi-platinum and at least deserve the success. And it was definitely quality for 1994 and stuff. Really just kind of advancing like the grunge type movement in like sorts of ways, just seeing what was going to originally be done with that sort of sound and such. I just would have to say, for what I saw from it, I do like most of the singles and like the abridged kind of concept, but you know, this with the truncated stuff that happened with this band, this is kind of disappointing that more of these things were not multiplied even further. But that's just kind of the concept. So there were 3 singles from this project, one of which hit #1 on the main rock charts, and that is No Excuses. No Excuses is the first single, and this has like the most contemporary and kind of pop rockish kind of feel towards it. I just feel like, I mean, yeah, it's kind of hazy, it's a little bit dreary and bleary and that type stuff. It's kind of dreary and bleary, but I do overall like the kind of, especially nowadays, it's just become a lot more of a workaday kind of rock tune that just has like a very kind of evening bass feel and highlighted type feel towards it, where it's not really a party track, it's not really a weekend, Friday, Saturday type track, but I just look after it. Maybe it's not Monday, but definitely Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in some cases, where just that kind of evening and midday, late day kind of commute, just in the concept of just hearing this when you're back in your vehicle or back on the road or back just getting done with your tasks for the day and just kind of having that breeze of just like the recreation that kind of comes along with it. And this is definitely a good song for a welcoming committee as far as when your responsibilities are done and that type of stuff. I just look after it in that context. It just has like, it is kind of malaised of a song, but it's probably the most approachable out of all the songs on this album. It's the most gung-ho and has the most pep towards it, and is the most pep to its step on this whole project, and it's the most overall marketable single, I would have to say. I think even today this is a staple, and it's kind of like a kind of more obscure Alice in Chains song with Lane Staley. If you have known all of his songs from Facelift and Dirt and some of those type projects, this is actually kind of a one that's just doesn't get that everyday overall appeal, but it does have an overall hit potential. It's just a rock highlight way back in 1994 that is not just grunge related, but this overall crest is like a highlight in rock music in general. That just kind of happens to be a thing. The second single is I Stay Away, and this one doesn't quite have the sheer firepower of No Excuses, but I do feel like it's a pretty solid follow-up, and I definitely like the taste of what this song kind of was. To me, it just kind of reminded me of one of those songs that's just kind of lighters in the sky, and it's kind of a more festival and evening type outdoor concert type feel towards it. There's definitely some ones like that something like Journey would do, or one of those type bands. It's just interesting that Alice in Chains kind of pulled off these more lighter guitar licks and just kind of more soft kind of Journey type music and some of those type ones. I can't think of like all of them, but just folks from like the early 80s, maybe Queen has done a record like this. It's just kind of more of like lighters in the sky type songs, type ones where you would be at a concert and you'd see like, 150, 300 lighters in the sky in the air and that type stuff. But it just really has like a, this is another malaise one, but it just kind of has like a grunge type feel in the chorus. I like how Lane Staley at least tried to make it like the Dirt vibes and the facelift vibes and like the chorus and such. This has a really interesting kind of appeal as far as that kind of went. And this is kind of like a nice follow up. I mean, really, the second verse is kind of shortened. I wish it would have been a little bit longer, but for what it is a pretty solid it is a pretty solid follow up, but it just doesn't have the sheer kind of massive appeal of like No Excuses. But it is a decent follow up just to say, hey, this is a worthwhile type thing. I just wouldn't see it as oftenly played as like No Excuses, but yeah, it just kind of reminds me of like, I mean, this one's not quite as, I Stay Away is not quite as work related. I Stay Away is not quite as blue collar. It just has more dreary kind of feel towards it, just kind of encompassed with like the surroundings and that type of stuff. Just a lot more, and maybe not so much starry eyes, but just kind of marveled in that sort of sense. But I do like the concept. It is pretty quality single for what it is. It's a solid follow-up. It'd be like 86, 88% territory somewhere in there. But Don't Follow is the third single, and this is one I didn't really like this single. I kind of feel like, I mean, this is really one that really is like the most malaise of the singles, and this is the overall kind of dark scenario of this project, is just trying to say that there's really like there's some real depressive kind of vibes on this project that just kind of give it an overall kind of, I mean, I do like this concept, but it just feels like it's a little bit more noticeable when you don't have the cranking guitars and the overall metal and grunge type feels of it. It just has a lot more like there's some seriously morose things kind of going on, and I just question as to the marketability of it in terms of like the single. But it's just kind of Don't Follow is just an overall kind of heavy emotion kind of song. This is definitely one that's more of like a kind of tugs at you kind of song. It's a little bit one with some more meaning towards it, but I just kind of look after it. Maybe it's a little bit kind of hammy more so than it needed to be. I mean, I look after it like, at least with I Stay Away, it kind of had that kind of more malaise type feel, but I feel like with Don't Follow, it really is kind of melodramatic in a lot of ways. So that's just kind of the concept about that one. But to talk about the songs I recommend, which is really the only other song I recommend off this 7-song project apart from No Excuses and I Stay Away is just Nutshell. The only other song I recommend apart from No Excuses and I Stay Away is just Nutshell, which Nutshell kind of has like an evening malaise in the car on the way home type feel of it, but this is kind of one, like a lot of these minus No Excuses just have an overall dreary and just kind of like really kind of like damaged and anguish kind of feel about them. Like Dirt kind of did it, but at least had songs with some degree of pep to them. There were some other ones like Wood and stuff like that that at least kind of deviated from the sound. But I feel like this project kind of has a theme of just overall. And it's not like I complain about that because I do like some of this dreariness on here, but it is kind of, this one's a real morose project. This kind of, you can tell just by the productions. And like I feel like a lot of the lyrics in these songs are just kind of like the productions really made this album feel extremely detached and kind of anguished and that type of stuff. But looking to the lyrics, it kind of has like a little bit more of just like trying to bring it to like song format to where it's not quite as bad. But I look after the concept behind it. It just, when you listen to these songs, there is a lot of moroseness to it, and that's just kind of the concept of it. It's just a lot more, when you look at albums like Facelift and Dirt and some of those type ones, they just had a lot more pep towards it, and I just think minus No Excuses, it just is kind of, unless you're kind of in a sorrowful situation similar to what's happening here, it kind of makes it like almost not as approachable. This is one of the less approachable Alice in Chains albums, I would have to say. I just kind of look after it where I do like this project, but it just lacks a kind of pungentness and this overall songwriting that has much to do just apart from like the kind of anguish that it has. I mean, I think some folks may marvel at the fact that it's so anguished and yet hit so heavily on the head. But I look after, there's a lot of songs, just to talk about some of the songs I didn't like. Like, I really liked the riff and the overall pace of Rotten Apple, but the song carried on for about 2.5 or 3 minutes longer than it needed to. That probably would have been a fourth highlight for me if it had been shortened by quite a bit. And Whale and Wasp was just kind of a poor instrumental. I mean, that one would have been interesting if it would have been a better instrumental, but I really couldn't get into that one. It's had a real lousy kind of approach towards it. Don't Follow, I already talked about not liking just because of like, Don't Follow, I already talked about not liking just because of the overall kind of melodramatic and really sluggish and just kind of anguish, but or just not really compelling anguish that probably was surprising that Alice in Chains just didn't have this time. And then Swing on This was just kind of an awkward kind of mid-tempo song that tried to have some jivey energy as far as maybe trying to be in like some sort of night venue or place with some bop, but it just was kind of the most awkward song on here and just didn't match up with the rest of the energy of the project. So I really only wound up liking 3 songs, and probably the song I would listen to the absolute most on this project would just be No Excuses. Now I can at least tolerate I Stay Away, at least has some degree of lessened energy. I mean, it's less, I Stay Away is like probably 30-45% lessened energy of No Excuses, which is already malaise. But both of these are just kind of hazy, kind of tormented kind of songs that just, I do like that concept of it being kind of anguish, but it's just the concept that the compellingness of it is just not quite as excitable in terms of like the production as to what it does. So I don't know. It's not to say it's not excitable. It's just the fact that it just really is more bruised than compelling. I think that's just kind of the concept where you're paying more attention to the fact of the damage of the project more so than saying, hey, this is a song I want to listen to after work, and this is a song I want to listen to before I go out for the weekend, and before I go get some beers, and before I go out to a karaoke bar or a dance club or something like that. It just has a different kind of valve, or it's just kind of tougher to figure out where to listen to some of these in terms of, like, for the most part, at least No Excuses and I Stay Away are just kind of in the car, just got off work kind of vibes, but there's really no party songs on here, and there's really not too much of all other type really essences about this project apart from Wallowing. So it just kind of happens to be a thing. But I'm going to give this album me liking 3 songs out of 7. I'm going to go ahead and give this album a 5.25 out of 10 because I feel like 3 out of 6 is really about half. But I do at least like 2 out of 3 of the singles. But Whale and the Wasp is kind of an instrumental, and that basically just leaves 3 songs I like, 3 songs I didn't. So I just gave it the benefit. I gave it the benefit of the doubt a slight bit just because I do like the power of the singles and there is some strong stuff here, but it just does a lot of wallowing that this is not quite as compelling as I would have thought it would to be. There just are other musicians who do it better, despite the fact that Lane Staley is an excellent overall musician and continues to be an all-time great, and then Jerry Cantrell is a highlight also, so it just kind of happens to be a thing. But the social score I'm going to give like a 2 out of 10 just because I really feel like it just didn't have it. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I feel like at least No Excuses, I Stay Away are like some reasonable, within a light, reasonable amount of just like kind of possibly getting you excited for the eventual weekend that's coming. But other than that, just listening to this stuff on Tuesday, Wednesday, knowing that the party days are going to be like 2 or 3 or 4 days from now, it just kind of doesn't have much real pep towards it in terms of social value. So it's just not really one as a highlight to listen with your buddies and that type of stuff. But in terms of the future, like Alice in Chains did drop an album back in 2018. They've been kind of taking some time off. Supposedly they're working on some stuff, but this is a decent project, but this is not very social, but it does have some gems, but it's just kind of hodgepodge.